Dyna Wobble. That comes from, there's in between these lines, these white lines in between the lanes, in some of these spots there's a lot of ruts. And when you go really fast like that and you hit those ruts at a bit of an angle, you know, it really makes that Dyna Wobble pretty bad. When I first got this bike, that problem was really, really bad. That problem would happen when I hit like 75, 80. And, you know, the bike just wasn't meant to go that fast. So I did a bunch of work to the bike because I travel a lot faster than 75 or 80. And the last thing I want is to be wobbling all over the freeway every time I go, you know, 75 miles an hour. Now keep in mind, that's not, oh look, I wonder what happened to this guy. That's not a problem that happens in a straight line. Right? That's a problem that happens when the bike's leaned over and you hit bumps. So because the swing arm on the bike is mounted to the transmission, and that's all rubber mounted in the back, when the suspension compresses, the rubber mount gets lateral movement in it. And I think the stock Harley mounts can only support, I think it's 100 pounds of lateral pressure before they start to give. And what'll happen is when the bike's leaned over and you hit a bump, you know, if you're going fast enough and you hit that bump hard enough, that rubber mount's gonna give, and it's gonna cause your back tire to point in the opposite direction that you're leaning. Now that's called rear steer. And then what happens is the back starts going one way as the front's going another. And if you don't control it and you fight it, you'll just make it worse. And next thing you know, it'll go from a small wobble to a big wobble, and then you're probably going to crash. Now let's talk about how to deal with that situation. Now when I say deal with that situation, I'm referring to not fighting it. I'm not talking about fixing the bike. We'll talk about that later. So in that video, what I did was, number one, I let off the throttle. Number two, I press the bars, right? So with both hands, I put a lot of force, forward force, you know, forward. I press the bars. And that was in an effort to stabilize the front end. Oh, did you see that Mustang almost get over? So we need to watch this guy, right? Because he's probably going to do that again. So I applied force to the bars, and I let off the throttle, and in that instance, it was still happening, right? So number three, I applied a little bit of rear brake, and I think at the same time I also applied a little bit of front brake, and I think the front brake was making it worse. And so what I did was I let off the front brake, and I kind of feathered the rear. So let's talk about ways to fix that problem. So there's I don't know that there is a true fix for it, but there are things that you can do to help improve it. And there's things you can do that are just band-aids. So number one, if you have that problem, and you know what, now that I'm talking about it, I need to do this, because that wobble hasn't happened in a long time for me, And the number one thing I would say to do is check your tire pressure. And now that I'm talking about it, I've been putting that off quite a bit. If your tire pressures aren't right, then you'll most definitely have that problem. So when I get home tonight, I'm going to do that, and we'll report back on what I find. So number 2 is physically inspect your tires, because if they're cupped, then that will also cause that to happen. And a cupped tire is a result of either a bad suspension setup or incorrect tire pressure. So number 3 thing to check is, I would say, your motor mounts. The stock Harley motor mounts, like I said earlier, they only support a certain amount of lateral movement, and if the rubber is already fatigued or worn, then the amount that it can support is going to be less than it was at the factory. So do an inspection on your mounts, and the rubber on the mount, if you've never seen one, it's pretty hard and stiff. Like, it's really stiff. You can't really move it around at all. So it'll probably be pretty obvious, you know, if it's cracked, if it looks like it's sagging. You know, Google a Dyna motor mount on Google Image, and you'll see what it should look like. And then compare that to what yours looks like, and you'll probably have a pretty good idea if it's good or bad. Number 4, I would say, is take a look at your suspension. If your shocks aren't set up right and you're bouncing all over the place because your preload isn't set, then that's also going to cause it, because you're going to have excessive movement in the rear. So check that rear suspension, check your sag, make sure your preload's set correctly. Now the Band-Aid fix that I'm talking about would be, if you put a really stiff suspension on the back of your bike, it's going to cause it to not move. And if the suspension doesn't move up and down, that rubber mount's not going to, you know, it's not going to have any lateral movement because the swing arm isn't moving. So a Band-Aid or an improper fix for this would be putting a really stiff suspension on and saying, oh yeah, I fixed my Dyna wobble by changing my rear shocks. When in reality, you mask the problem and you have a really stiff suspension. 5. Number 5, this is where we start getting into, maybe number 4, but number 5, we really start getting into things that'll help alleviate the problem rather than things that will, like maintenance items. So number 5, I would say, is put a true track on. And I was on the forums the other day and saw, you know, a lot of people put on a Predator front motor mount. And if you don't know what that is, look it up, but it's a redesigned front motor mount for the Dyna that it works a little differently than the OEM mount, and it's got a small a Heim joint on it that helps prevent that lateral movement on the front, which is a good thing. However, that Heim joint is really small and weak, so I actually put, when I first bought this bike, you know, a while ago, it would vibrate like crazy, and I assumed it had a bad motor mount. So rather than replace it with an OEM mount, I put a Predator on this bike. And to be totally honest, I didn't notice a difference at all with vibrations, and I think it's supposed to help with that. In my case, it didn't. I did, however, notice a difference in handling. It wasn't that big, but it was enough to notice. You know, one other thing that I should have mentioned that I would check earlier on, maybe as like a 2B, you know, after you check your tires, is your steering head bearing and your fall away. Because if your front end's too loose, you'll get some weird wobble like that too. And that I know on my bike is correct because I just said it. But that's something else you want to look into, is your fall away on your front end. and you might have to tighten up that front bearing. I knew mine was super loose because I couldn't take my hands off the bars without the bike falling over on its face, you know. And it didn't matter how fast I was going. I could be doing anywhere from 10 miles an hour to 80, and if I let my both hands off the bars, the bike would just burp. So I tightened up my steering head bearing, and I set my fall away, and then that improved drastically. And the bike, you know, it was just like when I installed the True Track, where it was almost night and day difference. You know, the bike just tracked a lot straighter. And you know, if you're setting that, you know, look it up or get a service manual. I don't want to go into detail with setting it up, but I do want to say, if you're going to play with that bearing, be very careful, because if you over tighten it, you can crush it. So look that up, get the specs before you attempt to do that. So the last couple items would be number 6, I would say, is a steering stabilizer. And the reason I say a steering stabilizer is because when we talked about what to do when you experience it, one of the things I said, and one of the things that's worked for me, is pressing the bars. And it's going to depend on probably how far back you sit. So I talked to this topic with my brother, and we have very similar bikes set up very similar ways. We have the same bars, we have the same seat, except his seat, he's a lot taller than I am, and his seat sits him back 2 inches. And my elbows are bent when I'm riding, and his elbows are almost straight because he has long ass arms, long ass legs, right? So he sits way back like this, and that's comfortable for him. But because of that, you know, his arms are straighter, and he's you know, he's not as bent as I am. And he's the one that actually gave me the tip about, you know, pressing the bars, because we talked about that, exactly this, with my arms are bent, his are not. Maybe that has something to do with it. Point is, pressing on the bars is stabilizing that front end. You know, my arms are acting as the steering stabilizer. So I believe that if I put a steering stabilizer on this bike, that the issue would probably pretty much go away. Now the last thing, and I'm real skeptical to mention this one, and that's a fork brace. And I think on the real early Dynas, you know, when they had way smaller forks, that it was necessary. But the newer, you know, 2006 and up Dynas have 49mm forks. If you've ever had one apart, these things are really big and beefy, and you know, I can't really see these things flexing all that much. Now granted, any amount of flex is going to be bad, but I don't know. I don't know that a fork brace would actually help alleviate that situation. But you know, if you guys have had one and you've experienced this issue, let me know about it. Let me know what you think. Did a fork brace help you on a 49mm fork? Because I'd be curious to hear what other people have to say. So that pretty much about sums it up. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully this was informative. I really didn't want to do a super long video again, but you know what? That situation happened, and I figured that was a perfect opportunity to have a discussion on the Dyna Wobble, because, you know, it happened. So, you know, like I said, let me know what you guys think. Shoot me a comment. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up, and if you don't like it, let me know why. You know, I want to improve what I'm doing. I'm new to this. You know, this is, I've been trying to do this every day on my way to work, and I've got this huge backlog of videos. But if you don't like it, let me know why, so I can try to improve. You know, positive, you know, I can take criticism, you know, as long as it's positive, you're not just being an asshat. But anyways, let me know. I want to know what you guys think of the video. I want to know what you guys think of the Dyna Wobble. If you have a Dyna, do you experience the problem? Have you fixed the problem? What'd you do to fix it? And would you add to my list of 7 things on finding the issue and fixing the issue? Anyway, I'm out for now, guys. I'm super close to work, so I'm gonna go do that. Later. Alright guys, I wanted to do a quick closing to that video to let you guys know that I did do an inspection on the bike. I gave it a quick once over. I checked my tire pressure, and my front tire was actually low as well as my rear. The front was it was about 29 to 30 psi, which is about in spec, but I run my front at about 32, 33. The rear, on the other hand, it read the same. It was about 29 or 30, which is way out of spec. I believe 36 is where it should be at for this bike, and I actually run mine about 38. So that was more than likely the root cause of the wobble that I showed you earlier in the video. And it just goes to show you, you really got to be up on these things. And when you have a problem that's out of the ordinary, you know, you should really look into it and figure out why it happened. In my case, you know, there's no excuse. I was just lazy. I knew it was something that I needed to do, and I just kept putting it off for a while. So take that for what it is. Make sure you stay on top of your maintenance. Hope this video was super informative for you guys. Let me know what you think. Alright, until next time, later.